So I'm a resident of Fred Dowling Housing Co-op in your riding, and I'm here with the Franklin Lambert Outreach Committee, which is a community organization in our neighborhood. And we surveyed our neighbors and found out that affordable housing is a top issue, so we're really working hard on that. And we were grateful that the province passed inclusionary zoning legislation last year, which we think could really bring thousands of new units of affordable housing, but the regulations haven't come through yet, so the city can't implement inclusionary zoning, so we want to know when that's going to come out so it can be used to build more affordable housing.
Okay, do you want to answer about the unit size?
Just on the really good point about family size units or larger size units, what I do on most of the development applications in my ward is I tell the developer you have to at least do 10% of larger family size units. And while I think they'd rather sell small ones because they sell quicker, they're usually pretty amenable to that. And we as City Council do have some power there. The other big point that I think has to be addressed is the inclusionary zoning issue, because if you think about the development that's coming to my ward, the development that's come to Josh Matlow's ward and Joe Mahevick's, we've missed an opportunity with everything that's been built that you would imagine that really if every single condo that's been built had a few units that were affordable or even Toronto community housing, we'd be so much further ahead. And so that's something we have to get going on quickly.
I'll just add this piece. One of the first things that we need to tackle is what I would call state of good repair, SOGR. Similar to the way we do public transit, frankly, well, we make a commitment on public transit side that if you get $1, your first dollar is towards state of good repair before you talk about expansion. Similarly, well, not similarly, but we need to talk about state of good repair with Toronto Community Housing. We are the largest property owner in Canada, Toronto Community Housing Company, about just under 60,000 units of affordable housing. It is in a pitiful state of disrepair. We need $2.6 billion to basically fix it. The city has committed a third. There's money now coming from the feds. I guess that's going to leverage provincial money. That's going to have an immediate, because there are many units that are just vacant because they're so poorly they haven't been maintained for so long. So that's a first piece that we need to do. And then parallel with that is we also have to talk about all the clever ways in which we can add an extra floor to Fred Dowling. I know you can't, but if one could, one should think about it. If there's any land that's available, years ago, the Jewish community did, Darhei Naom did a housing development at Lawrence and the Allen Expressway. Holy Blossom did Gunter Plout Manor on Eglinton Avenue. The Anglican community was in on it. The Catholic community was in on it. The United Church communities were in on it. We need to find every single piece of land that someone has, and you cut a deal with us using their money and our relief from building permit fees and planning permit fees, and we make deals. We say, yes, right there, we're going to put some affordable housing in. There's no piece of land or no air rights that we shouldn't be considering for building housing ASAP.
So I wish that, so Peter Milchin, former councillor, is the Minister of Housing in the province, and I wish that Peter knew the timing of all my regulations in the Ministry of Health and when they were coming forward and into completion. I don't know, and others here might, when that's a critically important regulation that many of us are excited about. So the legislation was passed, which allows municipalities across the province to mandate inclusionary zoning to make available affordable housing in new developments within their communities. It's been talked about forever, and it has the potential to be very impactful, I think, for addressing the issue that we're talking about. So I don't know specifically, but I'm going to certainly find out and encourage it to be the regulation to be passed as soon as possible. A couple of other things that the province are doing. So we're freeing up and making available current vacant provincial lands across the province for development, but development that would speak to this issue specifically. And it would give us more control in terms of the type of development that would take place, whether that's multifamily dwellings or whether it's inclusionary zoning in those developments as well. or affordable housing, community housing. It gives us a greater option in that area. I just open it up. If anybody knows when that regulation, I would hope it's soon. But I can appreciate the challenge here because I have probably 10 regulations that are in process, and I wouldn't expect the Minister of Housing to know that. I wish I knew the answer to your question.
Thanks. I think in terms of the larger units and that's the reason that in terms of the consultation that will go on now in terms of working with the provinces and territories, working with the municipalities, how we actually build what we need. Certainly in the Indigenous housing, I was quite impressed in Kasheshwan to see there were places, so 3, 4, 5 bedrooms, because that's what the community wanted, and that's what we have to ask and then listen and do this properly. And I think in terms of the seniors piece, so obviously the income of GIS helps a little bit, but I must say that I was quite shocked at the census that over half of our riding lives alone. And that, I think that it's very hard as a public policy piece, but I don't know quite what we do about that in terms of creating inclusion and cohesive society. If people are all in all of these apartment buildings, well, 70% tenants, I think, that people think we're a rich riding, but we've got some very big pieces of property with hardly anybody in those houses. So our riding actually is vertical. But again, how do we create community is I think quite a challenge for all of us. And so I think we're gonna have to look at all of these things. It was very interesting when I was in Malaysia, and it's what is being talked about with airspace, that I was in a concert hall where seniors housing was over top of the concert hall, such that people could, if there were empty seats, they could come down and go to the concert. I mean, I think that one of the problems has been the silos of government, and then we get into a sort of gridlock because of the different levels of government and then the different departments within the government. So even things like accessibility and the things that we're hearing about green, accessible, affordable, that all of those things need to come together as policy pieces that actually cross different levels of government. So I think I think that's how we listen and respond is going to have to be what we do bottom up. And it means that seniors is very much part of this strategy, that we actually need to know that from shelter to transitional to supportive in terms of mental health to seniors to all of these things are going to, and I think one of the things that will happen will be this portable allowance that allows people to live where they want and take it with them, so that they're not just in that sort of community housing projects, right?
I can just add just to point to that, one of the things that we are going to be debating at council and hopefully supporting is finally removing the seniors component of our Toronto community housing. In other words, seniors housing will no longer be TCAC. And having a focused entity that not only provides affordable housing to seniors, but also provides a holistic array of services for an aging population. That way we can actually bring it into the city. It won't be its own corporation anymore, but actually have it a dedicated service to seniors. And that's something that we need to work on and move forward with.
Okay, Sean, 3 more.
Hi, my name is Maria Szabelski, and I live in this community here, and I think we are very blessed overall. My concern is, I think the projects that the federal government, provincial and city is planning for the future in regard to affordable housing is wonderful. I applaud them to finally reach or to come to that decision. It has been long waiting. As I said, my concern is now, with the potential of money finally coming in, that this thoughtless building of housing without the concern of livability. Livability meaning space, people having sun coming into their rooms or into their apartments, having green spaces around them. As I said, we here in this area are blessed with parks, with greenery. We are also being encroached by condominium towers that basically start cutting off the light to other units. Also, my concern is the quality of the building themselves. I find whatever is built right now, what I've seen is poor quality, is being risen without concern to the quality of the buildings themselves. What is the city, possibly the province, or the federal government going to do about hiring city planners that are addressing those issues accordingly?
My name is Hannah. Sorry, I'm trying to do this race. Ooh, that's better. Hi, I thank you first off for spending time talking about this with us today. I am wondering what concrete policies can be implemented to actually incentivize developers to build affordable housing instead of multi-million-dollar condos that they seem to be so fond of.
Here, this way. This lady is this way. It's okay, he'll get to you.
Hi, I'm here actually asking a question for my friend Kameriak Inuktukau. He's an Inuit man who lives in Iqaluit, and he's been fighting for jobs and housing in Nunavut for over 2 years. He went door to door on foot in Iqaluit 2 years ago with a petition, and he gathered 1,500 signatures in February on frostbitten feet. And Iqaluit is a town of 7,000. So, Carolyn, you spoke of 150 years of bad policy and racism, and we want to say it's happening now, regardless of the apology that Trudeau gave. It's going on now. Colonization is happening up there. Inuit can't afford to live on their own land. Southerners are being recruited for jobs there and being offered housing and food subsidies while Inuit don't qualify. I know personally that there are young parents and senior citizens who are going to sleep tonight outside in a tent or under a boat with nothing.
Shame.
I agree with Joe that there's an emergency there right now, just like in Toronto, that 10 years is a great, billions of dollars is great, but we have an emergency right now to get those people into a shelter. There's only a small men's shelter in Iqaluit. There's no women's shelter at all for homeless women. I could go on and on, but I'm just trying to raise Kameriak's point today. Thanks.
No, she was the third. She was the third. Yeah, it was the third question. Yeah. That was 3 questions. Please, just settle down. You're okay, Sean. No. That was 3 questions. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
You're welcome, darling.
That was 3 questions. Yeah. So, do the councillors have something, an answer to any of these now?
I'll begin with, there were a couple questions regarding the ability to impose upon developers affordable housing, light, green space, etc. The answer is that there are some, but not many, and as Eric was alluding to, there's more coming. Meaning that right now, it's a matter of negotiations between the city and a developer when we are trying to convince them to give us so much percentage of affordable housing, to be able to follow our guidelines for tall buildings with respect to separation, sunlight, distance, etc. We do have policies that allow us to have green space and to ensure that we get it, but very often not enough, and sometimes there isn't sufficient space, and it's just given cash in lieu that's spent elsewhere. The other challenge has been that, well, we've had the anti-democratic and unaccountable Ontario Municipal Board with the city, yes, we agree, with the city under its purview, it's been nearly impossible for the city to ensure that its own secondary plans and official plan is seen through to fruition, because the developer will very often then just go to the OMB and typically get their way in opposition to the community and the city's own policies, which makes one wonder, why do we have policies in a plan in the first place if you can't actually follow it and see it through? So the OMB reform that Eric referred to, and I'm not going to do a big thing about it today because that's not why we're here, but I'll just allude to a couple of important points. One is that finally, if there is an appeal, it'll finally be a real appeal. It won't be a de novo, it won't be just a takeover hearing, but it'll actually have to be an appeal based on a substantive reason, a problem with the law, problem with the city following its own plan, etc. So a developer can't just go, well, we're not going to make as much money as we hope to, and we're going to go to the OMB the way they do today. Also, there'll be a moratorium on when a secondary plan is created and the ability to appeal it. There'll also be no appeals on interim control bylaws. There's going to be more ability for communities to actually have resources in place, legal and planning, to be able to challenge a developer at the new appeals body. I'll stop there on that, but what that means, and the reason I raise that, is that finally, as councillors and community and planners, we will have an ability to say to a developer, not only are we serious about the requirements and the expectations that we have, but now we actually may have a legal ability to ensure that what we are saying means something and that you have to do what we are saying. Second thing is with respect to inclusionary zoning. Once that regulation is passed, for the first time ever, the city will be able to say to a developer, not only do we expect that you will provide 10% affordable units within the new building that you're building, we demand it, and we have the law behind us to ensure that that happens. That is an incredible reform. So, and lastly, and I heard somebody kind of, say, I think Section 37, there's Section 42, and a number of sections of the Planning Act, which we won't get into today, but there are specific tools that we use all the time that we're already in the Yonge and Eglinton area, for example, getting more affordable, or actually some more affordable housing, more affordable childcare, more green space, etc. But these reforms will be a big help in making sure that we actually get all of the things that we need to be able to keep up with the pace of growth and to ensure that there's an affordable community rather than just developers getting rich.
Thank you. I'm going to take the issue of what can we do now and probe that a little bit. And I'm going to focus on the issue of shelters in the City of Toronto. So it is absolutely correct. Shelters are a stopgap measure. They're a bandage. We don't want the bandages. What they do in Stockholm, and I had occasion to study that system, they regard the second day in a shelter as a failure. Because the first day what they do is they evaluate your mental health needs, they evaluate your health needs, they evaluate your housing needs, your income needs, and so on, and then they place you in an already available unit that accommodates your needs. We don't have that in the City of Toronto. Yes, we need, down the river, we need to do housing. That's going to be a 10, 20, that's going to be a forever system that we need to develop. In the meantime, we need transitional housing to get people who are in the shelter system who perhaps, there's a lot of addiction, there's a lot of mental health issues that of course people are struggling with, and there, but by the grace of God, go you or I. Let's be clear about that. So we need to, as a city, make sure that we have enough shelter spaces. The minimum basic human requirement is get you in out of the cold and get you a safe place and a warm bed. Then we need to find a way to transition you out into a place for a short-term period of time, perhaps maybe a longer period of time, and where there are the appropriate supports. And that's why supportive housing is absolutely essential. And then eventually making your way up the ladder to permanent housing. Our responsibility as a city is that shelter system. And right now, I can tell you, it is stretched to the absolute maximum. And it's because of budget pressures. It's also because the world, I'll tell you why. It's because of, I'll tell you why.
We are not going to have people shouting.
The two immediate pressures, I'll answer the question.
Then. We have 250 people in this room, and not everybody is going to get to ask a question. So, I am not aware of the ability to have a conversation with 220 people. If there is a group of people,
no.
Guess what? What isn't working is you yelling. So if there is a list, I don't think there's any reason to be angry. I think so. No, not about the format. Just a second.
This is a reason to be angry, okay?
Okay.
This is a reason
Okay.
to be angry.
Okay. Anybody who wants to join a circle for us to talk about these things in a quiet, respectful way, please sign up there and we will have another meeting.
Oh, good. Good.
We will.
There's people that are dying on the street. They can't even afford affordable housing.
Okay. Siri. Yeah. Okay. Johnny, you can speak. Yeah. So 3 more now. Yeah.
Hi. Hello?
Can you turn it up a little bit? The mic?
Oh, okay. Hi, my name is Kim McDougall. I've been in this community here about 11 years, maybe 12 years. I am an Aboriginal. I'm from the First Nations of the Oneidas. I'm also an elder and veteran here in Toronto. I'm the elder at the Engineers Department, U of T. I'm on several housing committees and homeless committees. I have 5 university degrees. I've been working with the homeless here ever since I got here, and the Jewish van that comes around and helps out Via Vata parks in the park in Wells Park, and they donate clothes and food to people. But prior to that, I spent 4 years on my scooter handing out food and soup and sandwiches to the homeless people. You'll see me go down Vaughan and Bathurst and St. Clair quite often. I deal directly with the homeless people, and it's really sad when you get to know them. And a couple weeks later, they're dead because they're frozen, or they overdose because of the problems, personal problems, and family problems that they have. And I get to know these people on a one-to-one basis, name by name. And I've held a couple funeral services in the parks for the homeless because they can't afford to go to the churches and ask them. It's really sad to see, and I say the best way we can help our community is we as individuals do what I've been doing. If you can afford to get clothes for these homeless people and blankets and sleeping bags, that's what's really needed in the wintertime. They're out there in the summer, and they're doubling up in this area. At one of the meetings that we were at the Toronto Steering Committee, I brought up about the thing that overnight it can go from 60 people to 120 people in these out of the coal programs overnight. And that's a lot. It's jam-packed in there. And there's anger and there's frustration from everybody in there. It's a really hurtful sight and painful sight to see. It's not happening downtown. I'm not talking about the whole city of Toronto. I'm talking about this district, St. Paul. What can we do? What can you do? And that's one of the best ways to do it, is to not sit back and bitch and complain, they're doing this, not doing that, is to actually do something about it. Because they need it today. I mean, they're giving them sleeping bags that aren't even good, the zippers don't hold, they break. Some people out there, and they're constantly coming to me for clothes and food and everything, and I have to try to direct them somewhere. And there's a lot of them. Sometimes I'm up till 2 or 3 riding around till my scooter runs out of power to try to help these guys. And just to listen to them. That's the other part. They're your family. They're not only Aboriginal people. Probably 90% of the people out there are not Aboriginal. I'm talking to them, buying them hamburgers, taking money out of my own pocket. The last 3 or 4 holidays, people don't know this, I went up down the street and gave them $5 each, everybody that I seen that were street people. That's where you need to help. That's where you got to have a heart. And it hurts me to see people looking at them like they're animals and they shouldn't be here. They're somebody's children. They're somebody's. I see whole families out there, and it's a crime. It's a crime for them to be there, and it's really, really hurtful. And when I don't see that help, because my Aboriginal people in this area are averaging 2 people a death in this area. And there's other people out of Nami Res that are not Aboriginal. And I just get to know them and they die. Or they kill themselves as opposed to living out there. So I say, if you want to really help and really care, do it. Let's give these politicians a hand by saying, this is what I done. Not what the hell are you doing?
Wache, Mahikachis, Distikas, Makdanakdagam. My name is Little Wolf, and my English name or Scottish name is Johnny. But anyways, you know, in the course of the last nearly 3 decades, I've been to over 150 funerals, and for Native and non-Native people. You know, children that died because they got stabbed or they got shot. You know, people that got beaten up on the streets and have died. At whose hands, I don't know, but they're dead now. There's no coming back for them. The list is going to continue. You know, that's why I say, like, we got to bring up these facts and not speak generally about it. Because we could all be wishy-washy. I could twist, bend, share half the truth, but really not commit to anything. So far, it's just all talk. You know, we met with Carolyn Bennett, me and my group, the vigil at INAC for the Native youth and children suicide crisis happening in Northern Ontario. Meanwhile, every living dwelling and even commercial dwelling in Toronto has a water system, has a sewage system, have big reservoirs of water that is drinkable for any human. So we all, like we have a house, a brick house, a wooden house, a Victorian house. They take up a lot of space, you know, and think about it, like last night, I was talking to a woman on the street, and she was crying because she got booted out and she lost all her gifts for her grandchildren that she's been buying. You know, they're not living rich. I was talking to a woman, she told me, I asked her if she wanted a tea in a coffee shop. And she said, don't fucking touch me, fuck off, she said. So, you know what? It's not about being paid for what we do. You know what it's like to throw dirt on a coffin or on a family, relative's coffin, or somebody you don't know, a part of the extended family? You know, what are we actually doing? Like, yeah, we talk province-wide, we talk provincial health, we talk local health, we talk Toronto housing, St. Paul housing. But what about the housing that's where people are like, there's 17 people living in a shack? I grew up in a 2-bedroom house and there were 17 of us. That's happening. You know, and it's very sad. Like, how do you address these issues? It looks promising, but I would like to see it. Like, what are we actually doing right now? Can we take that woman to a shelter or somewhere? But thank you very much, and you know what? Let's keep talking about the facts. You can't escape them, you can't hide them. Thanks.
I'm a newly immigrant, and I have worked very hard in Toronto to get my affordable housing. I didn't wait for the government to give me for free. I have been working 12 hours, 13 hours, and I got my place to live. The problem that I see is the minimum wage. People here in the whole, maybe Canada, maybe the whole country, is struggling with the employment law. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. Because I have given my life working, and I paid my mortgage with the minimum wage, a little bit, maybe $1 extra, and I'm stuck. I cannot travel, I cannot renovate my place because the minimum wage is very far from the people that do some renovation or something like that. People are getting $40 an hour, and when we ask for a little renovation, they want us to give away all the savings. I think the problem here for the affordable housing is the employment that is not giving stability in hours for the employees. I don't know, I don't understand about administration, I don't understand anything about that. But I have my own experience, and I have a struggle to keep up with my expenses and my bills. But I have done that. I'm not Aboriginal, but I came and I am an immigrant, and I have been working for that. Our unions have asked for $15 for a long time, and the only now the government stepped out and said $14 on January 1st. But the problem is, thank you very much for those $14 per hour. But how about stability in our hours, in our working hours? They give us the raise, but they are allowed to give layoffs. They are allowed to cut the hours, and we have to bend on our knees asking for help. The shelter is getting crowded because people doesn't have an employment law that protects and gives stability in hours. Less than 6 hours in part-time is an abuse. It's not enough to pay bills and to eat. Thank you very much.
We're going to answer.
So
No, I know.
I'll address that, and I want to begin by acknowledging the two individuals at the back that spoke. Thank you for, quite frankly, putting a very human and real face on what we're talking about here. And if I can, we have a blueprint of what needs to be done. The report that emerged out of the Truth and Reconciliation process. And I can only speak to, there are significant elements of that speak to action in the healthcare system. And I think you'll see, very briefly, I want to address it simply by saying, you'll be familiar with Anishinaabe Nation, for example, that represents just under 50 First Nations communities in Northern Ontario, some of the most remote So this past summer, together with the federal government, but led by that First Nations, those 47, I think, communities, we signed an agreement that was written by that First Nations leadership, representing just under 50 communities, about a third of all the First Nations communities in the province, in healthcare. And what it does, in short, and I'll be very brief, it moves us to, in the near future, a healthcare system for those 47 communities that will be First Nations owned, planned, conceived of, run, administered, implemented by them, for them. And it was developed because we recognized, and I recognized, that the healthcare system in this province is one that was developed according to colonial measures and standards and history. It serves many of us well, but it has never served First Nations well. So I'm giving that example only because I believe that the solution, and thank you for addressing, you spoke not just of Indigenous individuals and their families, but when it comes to First Nations and Indigenous peoples, I believe that the solution, which, and Carolyn can speak to this much more eloquently than I can, is to actually honor the treaties, recognize that we're all treaty persons with responsibilities. To honor and respect those treaties and understand and recognize and acknowledge that those treaties never gave up self-governance. They come with obligations, and many, many obligations that we haven't met. So I think there is a path forward, and it doesn't take away the immediate that's required that you addressed, but I think until we take those measures that respect the dignity and of First Nations and other Indigenous peoples and honors those treaties, until we do that, we will continue to face this circle of crisis. With regards, very, very briefly, to the minimum wage, so, where did you go? There you are, thank you. So if you'll allow me, so that's why it's so in parts, and I'm proud to be, I was the first cabinet minister to speak out publicly in favor of $15 an hour as a minimum wage. I know that because I felt so strongly that it was a measure that needed to be taken. You probably would believe the opposition, not from the NDP, of course, we're completely on side on this, but from the Progressive Conservatives and from business across this country and beyond. Despite the fact that there is no consensus, there's no reliable evidence that shows that it is detrimental to business. In fact, there's much evidence that shows that it creates jobs, it creates a better work environment, it leads to better sustainability, retention of employees that are more secure and sustained. So that measure so we go to $14 January 1st and $15 January 1st, January of 2019, unless the Conservative government gets in and they've promised to roll it back over 4 years. So it's not the solution, but it is measures like that, and it gets back to the comment that I made at the very beginning, that we need to look at homelessness and at housing affordability in that broader context of all the steps that need to be taken now to help families and individuals have affordable lives. And I think that that's one important measure, and it needs to continue beyond that. And I agree with you, the disparity, it's still, PSWs, many of them were making $11 an hour just a couple of years ago. We made a change to increase the minimum wage for PSWs to $16.50. If any of you have ever, there are probably PSWs here, or if you've ever benefited from the professional work of a PSW, it's hard to imagine that they were paid $11 an hour for their work.
No, I think that's, as you heard, there's a lot of people who have questions, so let's respect that, and then I think that we clearly need a separate meeting around homelessness, period, in terms of a more holistic approach to that. And I do think that I just want to thank Dr. Hoskins for that agreement that he has with the NAM in Northwestern Ontario around health. That it is about really what my new job is moving from the Indian Act and moving to self-government and self-determination. It's only when nations will be able to draw down their own jurisdiction on things like health, education, housing, that we end up with a more respectful funding formula that actually is not doing such a terrible job that we have by this colonial approach, as Eric said. So this is I think an exciting time as we watch from child welfare to housing, to health, to particularly education, on the land programming, secure personal cultural identity, the kinds of things, but also dealing with child abuse and the fact that the intergenerational trauma is there, and that it is something that the nations know how to work on in terms of their healing. And so this is, I think, a really important tripartite agreement that Dr. Hoskins did with Dr. Philpott, and that will continue. So let's take, and I think on the Inuit housing as well, that last year in the budget was the first time that we actually had separate dollars for Inuit housing, because it is it is too cold to be homeless, and and I, from 10 years ago when I was Minister of Public Health, seeing 17 people living in one house and then looking at the TB rates at 200 times the national average. This is all connected, and so we will work with the new territorial government in Nunavut, and I thank you for your concern, because that's what makes this riding so special, is that you really are nation builders and understanding the needs that are coast to coast to coast. So thank you for that. Okay, Sean.
Thank you. Some years ago, I started hanging out around St. Mike's Hospital because I was a patient, and spent some time with homeless people around there, and had occasions to call Seton House where they stayed and would be given information. And I was told, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could match up one person with one homeless person who had no one to watch them. A few years later, when I was still doing the same thing and needed information on someone who I was worried about, I was told because of privacy laws, I could not get any information. And Kevin ended up been given rat poison, was lying in a parking lot and died, and I wasn't even allowed to know when I didn't know, when a service would be for him. And I was wondering if there might be some way to have a registry where, if you're not related to a homeless person and in a situation like this, you could give your name and be given information if you needed it. And on another matter, I just have to put a plug in for those of us who live in regular housing, who are seniors, who can't afford to move, and have accessibility issues and other issues. And I've had an issue for years that Wheel-Trans can't access the building. They've now put carpeting down that's all rumpled. It's easy to fall. There are a lot of seniors in the building. And I've been told that Wheel-Trans has a problem all over in rental buildings accessing entrances. And I'm wondering, why can we not change the bylaws so that tenants can call the parking authority on private driveways in rental buildings rather than just staff, because staff don't. And I've been pushed to the limit. After 16 years, I had to take it to the Human Rights Tribunal, had to fill a non-compliance form, and now this Friday it's finally come to a hearing. And obviously Human Rights, who has supplied the lawyers, thinks it's a really good case. And I just don't understand why I had to end up in this situation.
Hello. My name is Grace Kim, and She's 95 years old. She had the dementia. She had the brain injury. And I have been looking after her for the last almost 10 years. She was in a long-term care for about 1.5 years, but it was such a difficult time she had, and myself as well. I think, Dr. Hoskin, I met with you. I brought a lot of pictures that I took, and unfortunately, there was no resolution. And I brought those ones to the Ministry of Health, and I met with the enforcement agencies. Nobody did anything. And at the end of the day, in 2014, when there was a big storm going on, the nurse at the long-term care asked me to bring my mother to home in a safe space because their emergency power might not work. So I brought my mom home for stormy winter time for Christmas holidays. And at the time, the nurse promised me that they would not count on a vacation absentee, the leave of absence. The long-term care allowed them for 21 days. And I brought my mother, take care of her, meant to brought my mother to a long-term care, and on January 2nd in 2014, they kicked my mother because she stayed 1 day longer than the vacation, allowable vacation day. During that time, while my mother was at a long-term care, I complained a lot to several nonprofit organizations and the Ministry of Health and all the enforcement agencies. Because of that reason, they retaliated me and against my mother. So at the end of the day, they blocked me to actually visit my mother, and they kicked my mother out that way. And they took out all my mother's belongings to the basement. They did not even allow me to actually pack my mother's belongings. After that, I took care of my mother at home for last how many years, as of today. And it's been very, very challenging, very difficult. My mother is almost bedbound, so it's just two people need assistance. But I was afraid to take my mother to any other long-term care, and I determined to look after my mother at home, and I did. And fortunately, my mother survived through all that difficult time. After the long-term care process, she suffered so much because of the effect of her trauma. And I have all these pictures for you.
Okay, I think this is a specific case, so
No.
I think everybody's got
This is about the housing issue.
But it is a person.
This is a long-term.
I think we had a sort of general rule of sort of 2 to 3 minutes, so I think that it's time to move on. There's lots of other people who have questions.
Can I speak 2 minutes, please? Just one more minute. One more minute. I want to.
Housing only.
Okay.
Only 1 minute.
We need a timer.
No, I think that's enough, and we can take your issue aside. Okay, thank you.
People are allowed to speak, and my situation is
okay.
This is about housing. The building housing.
Yeah, I think it's.
Doctor, my mother, we got an eviction order from the building, so we are out, and they're gonna send. They're gonna bring sheriff next week, so I need some help from the related parties, please. The building is a non-profit organization. They're converting it to profit, and we are being kicked out.
Okay, well that's a very important point. So thank you for that, and we'll.
I don't know why I'm not allowed to speak.
I think you have spoken. And,
this is very, very serious issue, doctor, and really, in this court, to kick us out, and I need help, please.
Okay, so Dr. Hoskins will just have.
I'll just suggest, because this is a critically important issue, but I know there are also a lot of people that are waiting to ask questions. So I've got 2 of my staff from the constituency office at the back of the room, which are happy to start a conversation with you now. And I think when we had the discussion in the constituency office, we didn't have the office of the patient ombudsman, right? which is a critically important office for people that feel that, for example, and they have oversight over the long-term care system in our hospitals. So if you feel you haven't got the result that you were looking for or expected or deserved through the long-term care system, you can go to the patient ombudsman, to her office, and you can actually open a file there, and her sole job is to resolve challenging issues like the one that you face, and I'm very sorry that you faced that issue. So if you can, I've got two staff at the back of the room that are happy to start talking to you immediately.
You've been very patient. Yes.
Hi, I'm 15. I'm just here with my civics class. Was here with my civics class. Okay. I was just wondering, because I had a question that sort of touched upon two of the points you made in your previous speeches. So you talked a lot about how you created social housing, but also how the housing problem can't simply be addressed by that, and there are a web of causes that lead to homelessness and people not being able to afford homes. So my question was just to touch upon the future generations. So oftentimes we're at the university and we only have entry-level jobs, and I'm wondering how you're going to be able to empower youth and work with the private sector to make sure that we'll be able to have the skills we need to get jobs and find the money we need to get good homes in the private sector, so that one day we won't even, well, yes, there is still the need for social housing. I'm just wondering what you're going to do so that in the future we'll all be able to afford our own homes and make the money we need and have the tools to do that ourselves. Thank you.
I'll start with that one. I think that's fantastic. And as you know that whatever we do on income, that if people are spending 50% of their income on rent, that it's the disposable income is actually how you define poverty or livability or livability. And so I think that we also in a housing strategy will be working towards how the ability of people to own a home and there's lots of very interesting new approaches to that in terms of home ownership and renting to own and how you build that kind of equity that eventually has people feel more secure. But I think that the other questions, did you want to?
You know, it's interesting. When we did the first consultations around the poverty reduction strategy in 2013-14, and we asked folks, like, what is the key thing that is preventing every Torontonian to live a decent, good life? And you know what the strongest answer of what people wanted was? It was jobs. It was a job that paid them enough that their first choice would not even need to go into affordable housing, or that they could pay recreation service fees, or they could pay for transit fees and so on. So that is an important piece of this puzzle that the gentlewoman over there was addressing. That's an important piece of this Gordian knot that took us 20 years to get into this mess, and it's going to take us 20 years to get out of this mess. So when we at the city contract out things and say, okay, private sector, you do it, which really is a way of saying we're going to cut, that's a step in the wrong direction. When a company does something similar, that's a step in the wrong direction. When a government is, a proposed political party is saying, we're not going to do the $15 minimum wage, that's going to be a step in the wrong direction. It's all those little decisions made by every order of government that pushes us in the wrong direction. And it takes us to a place then when, several years later, we have really the kind of emotion that is here. I'm not afraid of the anger. The emotion is good. It's real because it's rooted in a Toronto that is busting at the seams. Things are not working so well here for too many people, and that's why I think we have this level of, frankly, this level of attendance. I don't think we've had such a strong meeting ever for any of these town hall meetings, and this level of anger. But the critical question is, what do you do with that anger? What do you do with that feeling? And I say, if you're not part of it, if you're part of a faith community and you're not part of an under the code program, find one and become part of it. If you're part of a housing development of some sort, get involved. Find a way to write to the mayor, write to all of us, and say, you support expanding the shelters by 1,000 beds or get us down to the 90% occupancy rate that we need to have. Grow where you are planted. Find a place where you can be part of the answer, because there are a lot of people, some people are figuring out very different answers. Some people don't want to give anything to housing. They're saying that if you're at fault, it's a kind of Trump argument. If that's where you are, it's your fault, get over it, we ain't helping you as a society. That's not what this panel is about. This panel is saying, we think that government has a role to play here, communities have a role to play here, you have a role to play here, we all have a role to play here, and we have to do what we can in each area of poverty reduction to make a difference. And if we do that for 1 year, 2 year, 5 year, 10 years, if it's a lifetime question, what makes people poor and how can we house people? That's a good life question. People spend their whole lives figuring out the answer to that question. And to young people, I say, you know what? Dedicate your life to that, and in 50 years, you might have a little bit of an answer to what it really is all about. Thank you.
So I think what we're hearing in this room this afternoon is the urgency of need of housing. This is the National Housing Strategy Summit, and the representatives that we have at the table are elected. The mic, are elected representatives. And I think Carolyn has already identified it's the how, when, and by whom will certain things get done. When each of us go to the voting poll and we vote for our representative, we're expecting our representatives to enact legislation that protects our rights. And it's something to say about the inclusionary measures of the possibility of the regulation coming into place. The reality is that we're not dreaming big enough to address the issues that are affecting our lives. You say 10% of housing should be affordable. We say at least 25. So whether you're listening to the public, and addressing the issues for which we elect you to put forward, is the question you need to ask yourself. Councillor Cole, you mentioned about the private sector often in land development. We're not interested in selling off our assets. That's part of the reason why we're in the problems that we're in today for many issues. Land owned by the city, the province, and the federal government should go back into creating housing for the residents that live in our country, our provinces, and our cities. Oftentimes, legislation is not carried out. And part of the difficulty, as you've already identified, we're not in silos here. All of these issues, health, wage, wellness, discrimination, all of these factors affect how we access housing and what is considered to be affordable. I heard that MPP Hoskins mentioned that the Prime Minister declared housing as a national issue. I can't remember what was said, but the United Nations has declared that, but I don't know by making a statement that that's actually a declaration. What needs to actually be done is that those words, that housing is a human right, needs to formally be put into writing. So whether that is the Charter, the Human Rights Code, or its own separate identification that makes it something that is enforceable and accountable, nothing will change. Statements mean nothing. We need acts that legislate and act on that. And last thing that I'd like to say with regards to that is that these systems are failing us. You heard this woman here talking about her mother, and there's other people talking about their personal issues.
yes, we want to hear broader statements, and you're saying come to the offices and talk about the individual issues, but the problem is, this woman's already identified that she's been to the office, and many people have been to the office that ultimately they lead to being on the street because they're not being heard for the issues directly affecting their lives. So I promised Sean that I would be under 2 minutes. I'm going to stop there, but the reality is that nothing is enforced in law. The Residential Tenancies Act, I'm an advocate. We've been raising issues. And if we're not heard on these issues, the things just continue to go on. I will stop with my time. Thank you.
1 minute.
Hello? Okay. This question is for Joe Havoc. It's on a comment earlier. You expressed a concern. Is he here? He's coming back.
John, sit tight, John.
Yeah, just wait. I'd wait.
Okay, pass the microphone to someone else, please.
Hi. My name is Eurydice, and I am a tenant worker. I am a tenant organizer. I work with tenants associations. I also happen to live in this neighborhood for 18 years at least. And I would like to let my MPP know that affordable rent is also rent control. So please, let's work with this vacancy decontrol. Let's get it controlled. I have to say that for years and years and years, I have paid more than half of my salary for my rent. I also am here with my partner who is in his wheelchair, and I wonder what kind of affordable housing he's gonna have, and we are gonna when he is in a fixed income, when I retire, because this is I've seen old women being evicted from their houses. I have seen people every time evicting tenants with silly excuses, with what I call renoviction or demoviction, to just crack up the rent. So that's what I wanted to tell my representatives. I also would like to remind them that next year we're voting. So please show us that you care about affordable housing. Thank you so much.
Chuck? This is a funding-related question for Joe Havoc. And I'm going to pick up on something you said earlier. You expressed concern about the dramatic increase in the need for shelters. Well, in 2014, the Housing Stabilization Fund dropped from around 32 million to 25 million, and has remained basically that till now. So, to my mind, the first step in solving any problem is containing it. And right now, the Housing Stabilization Fund is the only program that, with any efficacy, could prevent more homelessness. So why isn't that more robustly funded? Because in 2016, the shelter system, I would estimate, cost, its budget is over $1 billion, at 25 million for the Housing Stabilization Fund. That's about 12% of that. Does that seem like an effective funding strategy?
There is this fund that we have. It's about a $25 million fund that is called the Housing Stabilization Fund. If you are a homeless person and you're going into your first house, the Ontario Works person or the support worker will give you access to that fund to buy your first sofa, your first table, and so on. And do I think it's grossly underfunded? Absolutely I do. Do I vote if someone moves a motion, or if I move a motion to increase that fund, to double the fund, to both spread it out? It isn't, I think it's something like, is it $1,500 is the maximum that you can get from that? Sometimes it's used also to buy a new mattress if your mattress is infected with bed bugs and so on. And yes, there are all kinds of rules on it, but the rules are really a function. There's not enough money in that pot. And that's why we as a city have to have political courage to say to folks, and this is the political conversation, you know what? We're going to have to raise your property taxes an extra point, which will get us $25 million to fund things like that. And that's the courage that up to now we have lacked, frankly. And you have to help us find that courage.
So very briefly on the, it was so important to apply rent control for buildings prior to 1991. But that's only part of the solution. Don't think that our work or my work has ended. So way back when I first was elected, I wrote to the minister while I was a candidate saying, it was when the HST was coming in, and asking for a commitment that the HST wouldn't pass through to tenants, that landlords wouldn't pass through the HST cost to tenants. And we succeeded in that. We also changed the rent control so that it could go up only by the amount of inflation in any particular year, maximum of 2.5%. I think this year it's 1.5%. Pardon me? 1.8%. But there are a few other issues which are critically important. So the abuse of the above guideline increase by landlords, and it's widespread, including in this riding. There's the issue of vacancy decontrol as well, which is critically important. And then there's the issue as well, I wrote it down, the abuse of the eviction of tenants for personal use. So there's a lot more work to be done. I think we've made great successes on the side of tenants while recognizing that I would hope the vast majority of landlords are scrupulous and are playing by the rules, but we need to make sure that we control the increase in rent, and we need to make sure that we are protecting tenants against those unscrupulous landlords. So there's more work to be done, but I think we're in a better place as a result of the changes that have just recently come into force.
What can we do for the people who are residing in tenant units where we're having our landlords ask us to leave the homes?
One, form a tenants association with tenants in your building. Two, get to know FMTA, Federation of Metro Tenants Association. They have a hotline. We support the hotline. Three, if you have a fight with your landlord, we will support your tenants association with a grant to fight your landlord at the Landlord Tenant Tribunal, and we'll give you, I think it's $1,000 to hire a paralegal to have that fight. Those are three things you can do and be part of the solution.
You see your new coach is over there, I think. Did you, sorry, the tenant association coach there. You're gonna help her, okay?
Association, we've done the second step, but we haven't done the third, so if you're willing to support us.
Of course.
Oh, yeah. So, and Dion, I think that there is every intention of getting housing as a right into legislation. I think that we're running out of time in terms of the time we have the space, but I do want to do a separate meeting on homelessness so that we can begin the kind of work that obviously Nami Res being one of the best in the business in terms of people getting back in touch with their cultural identity, their success stories. This is a very, very, I think, proud enterprise in St. Paul's. Maybe we should just have, you want to have a closing comment or, yeah. Okay, and then we'll mill around if people want to talk to us, but also if people want to come to a special meeting on homelessness, we would like you to sign up and we'll send it so that it doesn't have to go through the quarterly bulletin kind of thing. Okay, 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 does anybody...
Carolyn, why don't you put it on your Twitter?
Huh?
Why don't you put the next meeting on your Twitter?
Okay, we'll put it on Facebook and on Twitter as to when we can do a special meeting on homelessness. Okay. Thank you all for coming, and this is obviously just so near to everybody's hearts, and why the emotions, as we say, are so strong, and this is something that we know is the key to people knowing they've got a roof over their head. So this is fantastic. So thank you all. You all are